Welcome to part 3 in this series on visual search. Here we're going to look at how people find information in very simple linear menus. So let's start by playing a game. In the following display, I want you to find the number 3. Got it? Super easy, right? So let's take a moment to reflect on the visual search process in this very simple task. How do you feel that you went about this? I'm sure many of you would have started towards the top of this list and gradually worked your way down until you found the target you were looking for. Here is data from a classic study that was run in this area by Nielsen, and this shows people's search time in various conditions. This study considered 2 independent variables. So this is 2 things are being manipulated and shown in this graph. The first one is, you see here are these 3 different lines, and those lines are of different length. This represented different conditions in which the number of items within the menu was varied. So there was a very short menu which only had 3 items in it. Then there was a longer menu that had 6 items, and then a much longer one which had 9 items in it. The one that you experienced at the beginning had 6 items in the menu. The second independent variable in this study is serial position. This is the position within the menu that the target could be located. So in the menu that you searched, this menu had 6 items and the target was in the 5th location. So it was the 5th item in the list. So if we were to look at this graph, we would look at the 6 item menu and then look to the 5th location in terms of serial position on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis we'd see the corresponding mean performance time for participants in this study. Let's take a moment now to look at this graph and see what the main results here. There are 3 interesting observations to make. The first one is what's referred to as a serial order effect, and this is where search time is generally increasing with serial position. So as the item appears, the target item appears further down the list, people take longer to locate it. This would suggest that people are searching the list, broadly speaking, top to bottom, because it's taking them longer to locate items that are located further down the list. However, the first few positions you'll see here are relatively flat. So whether the target was in position 1 or 2, search time is more or less the same. This would suggest that something special is occurring in these first few positions. We'll come back to this in just a moment. The third main finding to notice here is a menu size effect, and this shows that as the number of items in the menu increases, search time increases. So for instance, if we consider how long it took participants to locate the item when it was in the first position, search times were slower when there were 9 items in the menu than when there were 3 items in the menu. This suggests that as the choice set increases, it takes people longer to locate items. Again, we'll come back to this in just a moment. This is quite an interesting effect when you really think about what's going on here. So let's come back to examine in more detail and try to unpick what's happening with this second finding in Nielsen's results. This is the relatively flat search time performance for the first 2 positions. If we come back to examine this notion of perceptual span and the distribution of cells, you recall we have this idea that we have a small area of high visual acuity in the fovea, and then as we get further away from that point of fixation, things become harder to make out, but it is still possible to make out items out. This immediately close area to the fovea is called the parafovea, and we get medium levels of acuity. And so it may be the case that for very distinct targets like numerals, which we're highly practiced at identifying, even under kind of very hazy conditions, there might be enough information there in the parafovea to help us really spot the target. So I'm going to show the menu again, and here I've got a simple representation that shows the fovea, that small area in the centre of high visual acuity, and then surrounding that we've got this parafovea region where you're getting some information. So where would it make sense, if you were trying to find the target as quickly as possible, where should you put your first fixation? If you were to come in at the first item, that's nice, but it seems like a wasted opportunity. Instead, what you might want to do is kind of hedge your bet a little bit and come into the second item. In doing so, you'll get a high acuity fixation. That point of fixation will occur on the second item, but you'll get just enough information in the parafovea to see the first item too, which is off the centre of fixation. And indeed, this is exactly what people do. So here is a graph, a histogram, that shows the distribution of initial saccade locations, and it considered which item in the menu was first fixated when people saw the display. And you'll notice here that in this particular menu, which was a longer menu, the first fixation tended to come in on the third item. This makes sense from a perspective of attempting to optimize performance, if the goal of the participant is to find the target as quickly as possible. So let's pick up this idea of optimization. Here is a paper that we published at the GUI conference in 2015, and it describes a reinforcement learning model of menu search. This adaptive menu search model uses reward and cost feedback to learn optimal search strategies. And what emerges from this reinforcement learning model is not fixating on the first item within a display, but starting further down. But then also not looking at items in turn, but instead skipping over them. So what emerges from this adaptive menu search model is a range of behaviours in terms of how the model chooses to move gaze around the display to locate the target as quickly as possible. But sometimes this skipping behaviour does lead to the target being missed on the first occasion. And it's this feature that explains Nielsen's third result, which is the menu size effect. So as more items appear in the menu, the probability or likelihood that one is missed because of this skipping behaviour increases. So this is why you see slower performance when there are more items in the display. So let's look at this research question. How should a menu be organised? I want to highlight here a previous research paper that we published at the GUI conference in 2014. Here I'm showing you results from the experiment that was reported in our 2014 GUI paper. What you can see here is a menu organisation effect. So, just like Nielsen, we manipulated menu length. This is the number of items that were in a menu. So there are 8 item menus, 12 item menus, and 16 item menus. And then across those various lengths, we then also manipulated how the words within those menus were organised. We had an alphabetical order, a semantic order, and then an entirely randomised order where things were just shuffled, the labels were just shuffled up. What you can see here is that having either an alphabetical or a semantic order results in faster searches. Slower search performance is when the menu was unorganised. In this search experiment, the menus were kept constant, so they stayed the same throughout the experiment. So participants did multiple search trials looking for different items within the same menu. And if we look at performance from the first block of trials and compare that to the last block of trials, what we see is that generally speaking, performance improves. So with practice, search time decreases, and this would suggest that people are able to learn the location of target items in the menu over time. Let's take a moment to unpick that a little bit more, shall we? So in this experiment, we also recorded eye movements, so where people are looking on the display, as well as what the mouse was doing. And we recorded this over time during the search trial. What you can see here is a representation that captures visual search and pointing behavior. So you can see here the blue dotted line represents where gaze is located. This is the point of fixation within the menu. We have in this graph time running along the x-axis from 0, the beginning of the trial, through to 3 seconds, which is more or less the end of the trial. And then we have item position. So number 1 here is the top of the menu. The target is located at position 13, and that's represented by the solid grey line running across. And we see here that blue dotted line coming down the menu. So this is the person moving their eye from top to bottom over time. And then what we see is the red line here, the mouse pointer, is staying largely static to begin with, but then is kind of being moved in chunks, these very rapid movements from the top of the menu to part way down, where it then stays for a while, and then it moves to the next location. So the cursor is trailing eye gaze as the person searches for the target in the menu. What I want to do is just contrast this visual search. This is very much search and then pointing. So the person clearly does not know where the target is. They are having to locate it. In contrast, we can look at this next image. In this situation, from the moment the trial starts, the person's eye gaze goes straight to the target location. They knew where the target was. The mouse is then doing a rapid ballistic aimed movement to select the item. We've seen this pattern before. Last week, when we were looking at Fitt's law, I showed you this speed-time correspondence graph. And we see here the same pattern. In both situations, you see this phase, open loop phase, where there's a rapid ballistic movement to select the target, and then a final closed loop component where there's a slower process to select the target, and this takes a long period of time.